Hello and welcome to my channel. My name is David Novak. This is a bit of a response video, a response to the movie Oppenheimer, which I saw a week ago. Now, in trying to gather my books together for this, probably the hardest thing to do was to find my first book. Now, I will put this off till the end so you can watch as long as you like and you won't be subjected to this. Now, I know I've said another book is my first book, but let that pass. So finding that book was difficult. Even more difficult was finding my copy of the play Copenhagen by Michael Frayn, Frayn. And that proved to be so difficult that, in fact, I never did find that copy. Goodness knows where it is. All of my theater books, except for recent acquisitions, are down in a box in the basement, just so that I know where they are, and that was not in the box, or the box is, actually. So, alas, Michael Frayn is not to be found, but it is hard to watch the movie Oppenheimer without thinking about that play, which is, if Oppenheimer is a blockbuster film, Copenhagen is a boutique play. I believe it's only 3 characters, and I recommend seeing it. I don't think I actually read the play. I prefer to see plays. There was I don't know if it was taken from the BBC, but PBS had a very well done presentation of the play. And years ago, it was available on YouTube. So if you search for it, you might find it. In fact, I will try to remember to search for it. And if I do find it, I will put a link to it. It's a great play. As I say, it's kind of a boutique version of some of the same story. People have said, oh, Oppenheimer was a great movie, and I learned so much from it. Well, I enjoyed the movie quite a bit, but I can't say that I learned a lot, and I'm not any kind of an expert on the subject, but I have read a little bit here and there, so I know a little bit. It was a fabulous movie experience, I think, in large part because of the sound and the IMAX theater in which I saw it. Days later, I thought back about it and I thought, well, it was just pretty much standard Hollywood boilerplate. So a lot of any kind of serious issue that was discussed in the movie, you would find better handled in a written source. Let's just leave it at that. For all of its excitement, the movie was fine. So I can't bring you Copenhagen, but if you are interested in Heisenberg figures aplenty in that play, and you will really have a sense of Heisenberg's role in all of this. Of course, Heisenberg was not in Oppenheimer, but he was talked about. So years ago, a good friend of mine recommended reading Einstein, and these are my old books of Einstein. Honestly, I'm due for a reread because I unlike certain other booktubers whose names will go unmentioned, I do not retain everything that I read. In fact, I retain very little of it. One of these books, one is the first book and one is the sequel, I think you would say. One of them has the essay, which I really liked, about world government. The topic of world government comes in Oppenheimer, the movie, as sort of a throwaway line, somebody asks him about, do you believe in world government? And he says, yes. Sounds kind of like a crackpotty idea. It actually is not. It's obviously something that was thought about and talked about at the time, and Einstein makes a case for it, a very good case for it. I don't remember which book it's in, but it's worth looking for. The idea was it's a world government specifically covering nuclear weapons. So, anything else, the stop signs in your neighborhood, or even on a federal level, this world government for nuclear weapons would not touch any of that. Einstein believed it was important. It has never happened. Presumably, if humanity survives, it will come along at some point, with all the associated injustices that we think of when we think of government, at least in my country. So the other figure, who I don't think played much of a role in the film, was Richard Feynman. Now, I read this when it first was published, and I just got this. This apparently is a sequel to it, which came out, I believe, the year that he died. He is what do they call him here? A curious character. He's a colorful character, to be sure. And I first saw him on a PBS special, and I think it was possibly titled The Pleasure of Finding Things Out. It is not available on YouTube. Little snippets, little 5-minute, 3-minute snippets from that. It was a series of interviews with Feynman, are all over the place on YouTube. I recommend the full thing if you can get it. There are other similar videos about him from earlier in his career, which are also good. But that video was so good, and in fact, I think the show may well have been what prompted the publishing of this book. Though I can't really speak for that. This gives a lot of, so I just saw a title, Los Alamos from Below. He does a lot of, well, now I can't see it. I just flipped through it and there it was. Now it's not there. He does some talking of his time in Los Alamos, for example, to amuse himself. And this, of course, would not have been covered in the film, but following his adventures there probably would be worth a film. He taught himself safe cracking, and so he would go into the rooms with all of these highly classified documents and so forth, and crack the safe and open them just for pure amusement, if you will. Now, in the movie there was a figure a couple of times, twice I think, which was overdoing it on the director's part, playing the bongos, and that very likely was Richard Feynman, because that was another thing that he did. So these were all points that stuck out when I watched the movie. I have some other books that over the years I picked up by Feynman. This one I am not sure if I've read it or I just picked it up. Some of these I have read and I just simply don't remember. Now this, it says forward by Freeman Dyson. He was mentioned in the film, and I used to have some books by him. He was an author too, and I could not get into his writing style at all, so I must have chucked them in one of my frantic efforts to find more space or make more space for the books which continually keep coming in. This is the meaning of it all. I'm sure I've read this, but I have zero memory. It really is time for a reread, because this stuff, I'm speaking as a person who never rereads, with about 10, 15 novels making an exception. but I really think I am due for rereading Einstein and even rereading Richard Feynman. This one, I think he actually talks a little bit about some of the theory, and there's a sequel to this too, which I believe I had at one point, and obviously it got ejected. And God knows what the story is of this one. It was $2. I don't know if you can see that. My eye can pick it up, but the camera can't. So I don't think I've read this. One time I had a book that was a freebie at a book show, which was a nice thick book of just quotations by Einstein. It might have been called the Quotable Einstein, but when it comes down to reading an author, I prefer authors themselves. I've never gotten much use out of books of quotations, if you will. And this is something else by Feynman, which I think is a little bit too technical for me. I obviously picked it up somewhere. Well, let me just take a look. Paul Dirac was one of the finest scientists of this century. The development of quantum mechanics began at the turn of the century, but it was Dirac who in 1925 and 26 brought the subject to its definitive form, creating a theory as compelling as Newton's mechanics had been. This was a foreword by John C. Taylor. It goes on, of course. A reason for antiparticles. Let's see what Feynman himself has to say. The title of this lecture is somewhat incomplete because I really want to talk about two subjects. First, why there are antiparticles, and second, the connection between spin and statistics. Now, when Feynman is talking spin, he doesn't mean what we mean by spin, which is something Karl Rovian, if you will, essentially lying, but not quite. So this, I think, goes into math, yeah, and please, I mean, even basic algebra is too much for me, but one has hopes. So I think I will try to set up as a project, though, doing some rereading of Einstein and Feynman. I have so many things on my plate that I would like to read that God knows, my stomach is not as big as my desire. So I will leave it there and bring in my own. I should have pulled out my copy of John Hersey's Hiroshima. When I was 20, I just had to look that up. I applied for and was issued my first passport. No, when I was 19. When I was 20, I went to Japan. I did a round-the-world trip, and the majority of that was spent in Japan. And I happened to meet, just off the train or whatever in Hiroshima, the woman who had been the baby in John Hersey's book. I've read John Hersey's book. I want to reread that again as well. There's a man that is followed for some length of the story, and he has a baby. In the book, the baby is portrayed as a baby boy. She was a girl, and for some reason, Hersey felt that needed to be changed. I understand when you write, sometimes you change little details to make things more palatable for the reader, but changing the baby from a girl to a boy, to my mind, smacks of poor decision-making on the part of John Hersey. I can't see any justification for making that kind of a change. Now, this is my first book. I had taken that trip before I was done with school. I took a year off, let's say. And when I got back to school, I decided when I got back to the country, I thought I'd better go to school and try to wrap up some kind of a degree, and I did so. One of the classes I took had a project that was it was supposed to be a kind of project that you would do if you went on to graduate studies. The teacher was a real pill, and I will not say any more about that. I, being lazy, thought, well, I will just take a bunch of poems and make a book of poems. And so I presented that as and it was approved. People were doing all kinds of crazy things for their projects. And so the collection of poems was approved as a thing. And I had a backlog of poems. I was not figuring to use many new poems because I didn't have that many. And now when I think back, that must have been a lot of god-awful stuff that I compiled. It doesn't matter. But not realizing that one of the things that this teacher wanted was really to work with the students, with their things, and make them jump through all kinds of hoops and make their lives miserable. All of his students were terribly miserable. So I guess that was the graduate studies aspect to it, even though it was an undergrad course. And let me read the poem. So this is one of the absolute earliest poems that I wrote. It obviously was written after that little sojourn in Hiroshima. It has no title. Beautiful echo, dejected, alone in a cave, wasted away till her voice and nothing rest of her remained, after Narcissus rejected her love. Meanwhile, in a hospital bed, a girl, one of the many temporary survivors of the bomb blast at Hiroshima, was told by her mother that, according to legend, if she folded 1,000 cranes of paper, she would not die, and had completed 700 or 800 some before she did die. There have been many echoes and reverberations of the past that resound now into our present, while I, Narcissus, remain vitalic and handsome and virile as ever. Pretty standard stuff, I would say, and I just remember one encounter with this professor, and he really freaked out over the line temporary survivors. He said, you can't say that. Why, if you say that, that means that I am responsible for the deaths at Hiroshima. He would have said Hiroshima. No, when you read a poem, you take out of the poem what you want to take out of it. But it was quite an experience to see a professor freak out like that. And needless to say, I did not change the line, even though it was just for a college class. Of course, now somebody's going to dig up the old manuscript and point out, oh, he did change that line. It's possible. I'm inconsistent as anybody else. So this book was a compilation of all of my poems up to the time it was published, which was when I was 29 or 30. The poem that I just read was written probably when I was 20 then, 20 years old. So I will leave it there, except for a little add-on. I have a counting book, which I will share with you. My favorite counting book, which is by a chap named Dennis Nolan. Now, I don't know if he's related to Christopher Nolan, who directed the movie Oppenheimer. That would be a very nice coincidence. It's a wonderful book. I mean, I think you can see by the cover how wonderful it is. And it just goes through the the numbers. So there you go. You have 1, 2, 3. Ugh, and I just busted the spine. Oh well, so be it. It's a very old book. I've had this for a long time. I bought it at the Field Museum, of all places. I think I was working some kind of a job there. Oh, it's such a wonderful book. I was looking to see if, you can get a hardback copy of this. And I wish I had it in a hardback, but at this point, even with the broken spine, it's fine. I mean, these illustrations are so wonderful. Well, don't let me suggest massacring books, but I could see getting 2 copies of it, breaking the book down, and putting these up on the wall. I mean, they're just so wonderful, down a hallway or something. Somebody must have the original artwork to it like that. I'll quit. It goes up to number 20, I think, with a surprise twist at the end. It's really, really a wonderful book. So I will leave that there. Thank you for stopping by my channel.